This image is actually a photograph by Livia Corona, who is an artist that is from Mexico City, but lives and works in the US and in Mexico. And this is from a series called 2 Million Homes for Mexico. And this particular one is called 47,526 Homes for Mexico. It was made in 2007. This is actually one of two photographs from the series that we have in our collection. And one's an external view, and it's interesting because the other one is inside one of these tiny little homes.
Yeah, I think the perspective of this photograph is just incredible. Like you're almost confused at first, and I think some students pointed this out, that you're not quite sure what you're looking at. And then this is occurring to me now, but tying this back to what we were talking about with the earlier two pieces, where it's so clear that someone's making a commentary on, humans and the way we live, but those pieces don't include any people at all, and they in fact feel really inhospitable to human life. This doesn't feel that different. Like it almost feels like non-human with its regularity and geometric abstraction, until you realize that the title is literally 47,526 homes for Mexico, right? So it's meant to be hospitable, and yet it feels so inorganic and regular. Just that the kind of angle, that the way the picture is framed, your eyes sort of guide it towards a point in the foreground, and then if you follow it, you get to the back where there's like mountains, right? Which is such an interesting juxtaposition because it's almost misty back there, but which makes the homes, the rows of homes that you see, come into such sharp relief. Like the colors are so bright. Just that contrast to me is really striking.
It really is. It takes a while for my eye to get back to those misty mountains. It just seems like an endless rows of houses. And it's so densely packed, it doesn't feel like there's any room for the humans in this landscape. I
Yeah,
love,
which is so ironic since it's titled Homes.
right, exactly. I love how the students were talking about that Y shape that you
Yeah,
had, you were talking about. It's a really strong geometric composition, and it just kind of leads into this incredible expanse.
I loved how one student, Jay, talks about how in some ways the geometric lines and shapes are actually kind of aesthetically pleasing, just that regularity is pleasing to the eye. At the same time that other students, for example, Sarah, I think, or I might be mistaken, said that the image made them uncomfortable, or like there was something unpleasant about the crowdedness of it, which I think is simultaneously happening as well.
It's an incredible image if you just sort of imagine yourself zooming in and trying to walk through the streets. There isn't a lot of point of access. And to see the roads that we can see in the foreground, there are all these colorful patches where I think little markets have sprung up because there was
Yeah,
no planning for markets and parks and schools. These housing developments didn't take into account the different needs that these communities would have.
right. I mean, to put it another way, didn't take into account what it means to be living in these spaces, right? And I really liked what some of the students, Hannah talked about how this reminded her of depictions of Hong Kong that we've seen in the cyberpunk class. So in Ghost in the Shell, that you get these scenes of a really overcrowded Hong Kong. And of course, that's differently represented, right? Like with a lot of high rise buildings and like gritty streets. And this isn't high rise, but it gives that same sort of oppressive feeling from the repetition, I think, and regularity at some point. And the markets also, I think that in the films that we've seen, in The Matrix, Ghost in the Shell, there are these chase scenes of markets where you soon realize is where life is most vibrant in these kind of dystopian landscapes. And I wonder if the same is kind of happening here.
I imagine it is. That's such a great parallel with those movies. So should we move to the next image? Right. This one is by Jane Hammond, who's actually a Mount Holyoke alumna. And it's from a series that she did of these butterfly maps. This one is called All Souls, and it's from 2006. And if we could be in person, it's very large. It would take up most of a wall if you could see it in person. And so the butterflies are also large, and it has this really 3D quality to it because it's made from handmade paper, and it's not flat. And the butterflies, when you look at them in person, you might even think they're real because they are three-dimensional, and they even have the little antennae.
Yeah.
So it's very captivating in person.
I mean, I'm just struck by it takes you a while to adjust your eyes and realize that it's set against a map. I think the butterflies are what the eye is drawn to at first, and then you realize that it's set against a map. I think it says of Uganda, right? It's just so interesting. I wonder if there was any intentionality to the butterflies chosen, like the direction that they're placed in. I'm just thinking now of like on social media, there's a hashtag immigration is beautiful around kind of conversations of the monarch butterflies and their yearly immigration. So it seems like the butterfly has become a symbol too of migration, movements of people too, right, as an allegory for that. And the fact that this is set against a map just made me think of that.
It is so interesting, right? Because butterflies don't know national boundaries the way humans are forced to be limited in terms of where their movements can be. And so it's interesting. This was actually, Jane Hammond had a dream that it was during the Iraq War, instead of bombs coming down, it was butterflies. So she envisioned this borderless map and this idea where, this kind of place where we were not constrained by borders, these political configurations that humans create.
Yeah, and I think a lot of students picked up on the kind of political commentary across both works, but maybe I won't go into that right now. In this piece, at any rate, a lot of them talked about the political nature of what's happening with the environment now as well. A bunch of students talked about who the intended audience might be, right? If the artist was trying to make a comment on peace and the environment at the same time, trying to think about the two together instead of apart, or the idea that nature transcends humans, right? Like the butterflies are overlaid on top of the map rather than kind of embedded or something else. But I found all of that really interesting.
Yeah, kind of the layered quality of this, really beautiful. And I think also some of the students pointed out it takes a while, as you were saying, for your eyes to adjust to all of the information that's embedded behind. Like, are they rivers and bodies of water? And are the red lines roads? And what are those locations? And is there meaning behind the way it's arranged?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the symbolism of the butterflies too. Lindsay and Gia talked about how butterflies are often used to represent new beginnings, right? The idea of the transition from a caterpillar to a butterfly, that kind of radical transformation into something beautiful, and also of resilience, right? And rebirth. So I thought all of that was really, really cool to think about in terms of the piece, and especially with the backdrop being a map. And I wonder whether the different butterflies had like specific significance as well.
I actually don't know the answer to that. That would be a great thing to ask the artist. Should we look at the two together? And I'm sure she'd actually be happy to respond to any questions that students had. These are actually, again, I would never put these two together. I wouldn't have thought to put them together, but it's amazing how they seem to speak to one another in terms of the repetition, all these small units in a larger landscape.
They're both sort of beautiful in their own way. I mean, certainly the colors are really striking. The orange and the pinks in the corona, and just all the colors of the butterfly and the Hammond. But on the one hand, the regularity that could be sort of pleasing to some and oppressive to others, but the sort of organic flow in the Hammond with the butterflies just sort of scattered across the piece. But put together, I think a lot of students picked up on possible political messages that both artists are trying to convey. On the one hand, the sort of impossibility of home ownership, or the kind of dream of home ownership, and on the other hand, the sort of beautiful migration, right, of non-human insects.
Yeah, this idea of home, what you have control over and what you don't have control over, is really interesting. And I think obviously the intention behind creating these homes in Mexico was to give more people a place to live, but at the same time creating a somewhat impossible situation,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
without the, all of the amenities that you would need in a place like this. And then on the other hand, the butterflies, this idea of the constraints of the movements of people in areas of conflict zones, and the inaccessibility of a place to live.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much for being willing to talk to me about your students' ideas.
Yeah, no, this was such a rich conversation. I feel like I learned a lot as well.
And again, the students teach us so much, right? So
Yep.
thanks to all of your students.
Thank you.